You've probably stepped on them, mowed them down, or pulled them out and thrown them in the yard waste bin without a second thought. The ones growing in the cracks of your driveway, crowding the edge of your garden bed, popping up in the lawn no matter how many times you rip them out. Most people see weeds and think nuisance. What almost nobody realizes is that long before penicillin, before hand sanitizer, before the pharmacy on every corner, people survived infections using exactly these plants. Physicians in ancient Greece packed them into wounds. Field medics in wars fought a century apart reached for the same leaves. And now, modern laboratories are running the plants through the same tests used to evaluate pharmaceutical antibiotics and finding real antimicrobial activity again and again. Stay with us for number 4. It contains a compound that laboratory studies have found stops the growth of bacteria that resist multiple modern antibiotics. And it's probably growing on a tree branch near you right now, completely ignored. And number 1 was quite literally used as a battlefield antiseptic within living memory, packed into open wounds by people who had no other option, and it worked well enough that they trusted their lives to it. 11 plants. Let's get started. Number 11. Garlic mustard, the invasive weed with a chemical weapon inside it. Garlic mustard is one of the most hated plants in North American forest ecosystems. It's officially classified as invasive, spreads aggressively through disturbed woodland, chokes out native wildflowers, and land management agencies spend real money trying to eradicate it every single year. Crush a leaf and the smell gives it away instantly. A sharp mix of garlic and mustard that comes from a compound called allyl isothiocyanate, the same general class of sulfur compound that gives horseradish and wasabi their bite. That compound isn't just there for flavor. It's a defense chemical the plant produces to protect itself from insects and fungi, and researchers studying it have found it has measurable activity against a range of bacteria as well, including strains that show resistance to conventional antibiotics in laboratory testing. That's part of why garlic mustard spreads so successfully. It's chemically weaponized against the microbial life around its roots, clearing space for itself in the soil. European settlers didn't see an invasive weed. They saw a familiar kitchen plant and brought it over deliberately as both food and medicine, which is the entire reason it's in North America at all. Traditional use across Europe included crushing the leaves for minor cuts and skin infections, and drinking a mild infusion for chest congestion. The vitamin C content in the leaves is exceptionally high, higher than oranges by weight, which is part of why sailors and rural households leaned on it seasonally. As a food, young leaves taste like a milder version of the crushed smell, garlicky and slightly peppery, and work well chopped into salads, blended into pesto, or wilted into soup. The second-year flower stalks can be steamed like a vegetable before the plant sets seed. An entire ecosystem is fighting to remove this plant from forests, while the compound responsible for its aggressive success is the same one researchers are now studying for its antibacterial potential. Number 10. Yarrow, the ancient wound herb with real antimicrobial chemistry behind it. Yarrow has one of the longest documented medicinal histories of any plant on Earth. Its Latin name, Achillea millefolium, references the legend that Achilles used it to treat wounded soldiers during the Trojan War. Whether or not that specific story is true, the practical reality is that dried yarrow was carried by soldiers across multiple continents and multiple centuries specifically to pack into open wounds in the field, long before anyone understood germ theory. Modern phytochemical analysis has found why that practice persisted for so long. Yarrow contains a mix of compounds including achillene, chamazoline, and various flavonoids that laboratory studies have shown inhibit the growth of several strains of bacteria, alongside compounds that promote blood clotting and reduce inflammation at the same time. That combination matters. A wound herb that only stops bleeding but does nothing about infection is incomplete. Yarrow appears to do both simultaneously, which is precisely why field medicine across unrelated cultures kept independently arriving at the same plant. Beyond wound care, yarrow tea has a long traditional use for feverish colds and gut infections, and the same anti-inflammatory compounds are part of why herbalists still reach for it during flu season. Fresh crushed leaves pressed directly onto a minor cut can visibly slow bleeding and reduce the risk of the wound turning red and inflamed over the following days. A strong infusion, cooled and used as a wash, has traditionally been applied to cuts and scrapes before bandaging. For anyone who spends real time outdoors, away from a first aid kit, learning to identify yarrow is one of the most practical pieces of plant knowledge available, backed by a track record measured in thousands of years. Number 9. Common plantain, the sidewalk weed that pulls infection out of a wound, not the banana. The flat-ribbed leaf plant that grows in every compacted lawn, every gravel driveway, every crack in the sidewalk on the planet. It's so common that most people mentally filter it out entirely. Common plantain has been used medicinally on nearly every continent it grows on, which is nearly all of them. The leaves contain compounds called aucubin and allantoin, along with tannins, which together have documented antibacterial and anti-inflammatory effects confirmed in modern laboratory research. Aucubin specifically has been studied for its activity against several bacterial strains associated with skin infections, and allantoin is separately recognized for accelerating the repair of damaged tissue. That combination is why plantain has such a specific traditional reputation. Something bites you, cuts you, or gets infected, and plantain is the plant people reach for. Crush a fresh leaf, press it onto a sting, a splinter site, or a small infected-looking cut, and the swelling and discomfort measurably ease within minutes. That speed is what convinces skeptics. It isn't a slow herbal process. It's fast enough to notice in real time. A drawing salve made from infused plantain oil has traditionally been used on splinters and minor abscesses specifically because it appears to help pull debris and infection toward the surface of the skin. Plantain tea made from the dried leaf has also been used as a gentle internal treatment for gut inflammation and minor respiratory infections. The plant survives foot traffic, poor soil, and total neglect and shows up without ever being planted. Most people spray it with weed killer. The people who know it reach for it the second something on their skin starts looking angry and red. Number 8. Self-heal, the small purple flower with a name earned the hard way. The name sounds like marketing. It isn't. Self-heal, Prunella vulgaris, earned that name from centuries of consistently observed results across European and Asian herbal traditions that developed independently of each other. It's a low-growing plant with small purple flower spikes that shows up in lawns, meadows, and garden edges from spring through autumn across most of the northern hemisphere, usually ignored completely until someone points it out. Medieval European herbalists considered it one of the most reliable wound and infection herbs available, applied to cuts, used as a mouth rinse for sores, and brewed for sore throats. Modern research has identified a likely explanation for that broad traditional reputation. Self-heal contains rosmarinic acid, one of the more extensively studied antioxidant compounds found in any common plant, along with ursolic acid, a compound with documented antimicrobial and anti-inflammatory effects in laboratory testing against a range of bacterial strains. Separate research has also looked at self-heal's activity against certain viruses, an area that remains actively studied rather than settled, but the level of continued scientific interest is itself notable for a plant most people walk past without a glance. Topically, self-heal has been shown in small clinical studies to reduce healing time for minor mouth ulcers and to calm inflamed skin quickly, consistent with the plant's old reputation. Brew the fresh or dried herb as a tea for sore throats and general immune support during cold season. Crush fresh leaves and apply directly to minor cuts, insect bites, or irritated skin. The plant is also edible, mild, and slightly bitter, and works well added to soups. A plant called self-heal, earning that exact name independently across unrelated cultures on different continents, is not a coincidence worth ignoring. Number 7. Chickweed, the soft green mat that calms infected, irritated skin. Chickweed looks almost too delicate to do anything useful. Thin, sprawling stems, tiny oval leaves, small white star-shaped flowers that appear nearly year-round in mild climates. It covers bare soil fast, forms a dense low mat, and vanishes completely once the weather turns hot and dry. Despite the fragile appearance, it has one of the most consistent traditional reputations for skin relief of any common weed, and the chemistry behind that reputation holds up under modern scrutiny. Chickweed leaves contain saponins and phytosterols, with documented anti-inflammatory and mild antimicrobial effects, meaning they reduce both the itching and the bacterial load at the surface of irritated skin at the same time. That dual action is exactly why it shows up so often in traditional first aid for insect bites, minor rashes, and small infected-looking scrapes where inflammation and low-grade infection tend to arrive together. Crush fresh leaves and press them directly onto irritated or minor infected skin for fast relief. The cooling effect is noticeable almost immediately. For longer-term use, infusing dried chickweed in a carrier oil over several weeks produces a salve that traditional herbalists have relied on for chronic skin irritation and slow healing scrapes. The fresh plant is also edible, with a mild, pleasant flavor that works fine in a salad, or stirred into soup at the end of cooking. Most people see chickweed as background noise in the garden. For anyone dealing with a minor skin infection and no antiseptic on hand, it's one of the fastest-acting plants on this entire list. Number 6. Wild bergamot, the flower that gave the world thymol before a lab ever synthesized it. Wild bergamot, also called bee balm, is a tall wildflower with shaggy lavender-pink blooms that shows up along roadsides, field edges, and untended garden borders through mid to late summer. Pollinators swarm it. Most homeowners either ignore it entirely or pull it as an overgrown nuisance, crowding out tidier plants. What almost nobody realizes is that this plant is a natural source of thymol, the same antiseptic compound used commercially in mouthwash and hand sanitizer products today. Originally derived from thyme and closely related plants like this one before synthetic production took over. Laboratory research on wild bergamot's essential oil has found strong antimicrobial activity against a broad range of bacteria and fungi, which lines up precisely with its historical use. Indigenous nations across North America used wild bergamot extensively for infections, applying crushed leaves to wounds, using strong teas as a gargle for sore throats, and steaming the leaves to help clear respiratory infections. Early European settlers adopted the plant quickly once they recognized the antiseptic smell was nearly identical to cultivated thyme back home. A strong tea made from the leaves and flowers has traditionally been used as a mouth rinse for infections of the gums and throat, taking advantage of that same thymol-driven antiseptic action. The crushed fresh leaf, rubbed directly onto a minor wound, has a similar traditional use to plantain, helping keep the area clean while it heals. As a culinary plant, the leaves make a fragrant tea on their own, often called Oswego tea, with a flavor close to a mix of mint and oregano. A wildflower planted for pollinators is quietly one of the most legitimately antiseptic plants most people will ever grow without realizing what they have. Number 5. Goldenrod, the allergy scapegoat that's actually a documented urinary antiseptic. Goldenrod gets blamed for hay fever every single autumn, and it's almost entirely innocent. The real culprit is ragweed, which blooms at the same time and produces wind-blown pollen. Goldenrod's pollen is heavy and sticky, spread by insects, not wind, meaning it rarely reaches human sinuses in meaningful amounts. While it's been wrongly accused for a century, actual research into goldenrod has focused on something else entirely: its use as a urinary tract antiseptic. European herbal medicine has used goldenrod for kidney and bladder complaints for centuries, and it remains an approved traditional remedy for mild urinary tract infections in several European countries today, included in official herbal monographs. The plant contains flavonoids and saponins, along with compounds called quercetin and rutin, that laboratory studies have shown produce both an anti-inflammatory and a genuinely antimicrobial effect within the urinary tract, alongside a mild diuretic action that increases urine flow and helps flush bacteria out mechanically at the same time the plant chemistry is working against them directly. That combination, flushing volume plus antimicrobial activity, is exactly the two-pronged approach modern urinary tract treatment protocols are built around, arrived at independently through centuries of trial and observation. A tea made from dried goldenrod flowering tops, taken at the first sign of urinary discomfort, has a long-standing traditional use for exactly this purpose. It also has a secondary traditional use as a wound wash, taking advantage of the same antimicrobial compounds applied externally instead of internally. Next time goldenrod blooms along the roadside and someone nearby starts sneezing, the plant getting blamed is very likely a documented antiseptic being punished for a crime committed by its neighbor. Number 4. Burdock, the clingy weed with a root worth digging for. Burdock is instantly recognizable in late summer by its large, coarse, elephant ear-shaped leaves and the round bird seed heads that cling to clothing, fur, and shoelaces with total commitment. Actually the plant that inspired the invention of Velcro. Most gardeners deal with burdock exactly once, and then spend years trying to eliminate it from the property, since the taproot can run over 2 feet deep and regrows aggressively from any fragment left behind. That same stubborn root is the part with the medicinal reputation. Burdock root has a long history of use across European and East Asian herbal traditions, and in East Asian cuisine specifically, the root is a legitimate cultivated vegetable, sold fresh in markets under the name gobo. Laboratory analysis of burdock root has identified compounds including arctogenin and various polyphenols, with documented antimicrobial and anti-inflammatory effects, alongside a long traditional reputation as a blood purifier, an old phrase that in modern terms roughly translates to supporting the liver and skin's ability to clear waste and resist infection. Traditional use leaned heavily on burdock root tea and tincture for stubborn skin conditions including acne, boils, and chronic minor infections that seem to keep recurring, on the logic that supporting the body's clearance systems would reduce the conditions that let low-grade infection take hold repeatedly. A poultice made from crushed fresh burdock leaf has also been used traditionally on boils and abscesses to help draw out infection, similar in concept to plantain but working on deeper, more stubborn skin issues. As food, the young root can be peeled, sliced thin, and sautéed or added to soup, with a mild, earthy flavor similar to a cross between a potato and an artichoke heart. The plant everyone fights to remove from their yard has one of the more legitimately useful roots on this entire list, buried literally out of sight the entire time. Number 3. Usnea, the tree lichen that was a real antibiotic before antibiotics existed. Usnea isn't technically a weed in the traditional sense, it's a lichen, a pale greenish-gray, stringy growth that hangs off tree branches and fence posts in humid climates, often mistaken for Spanish moss or simply dismissed as a sign of a sickly tree. It is neither a parasite nor a sign of tree disease, and it happens to be one of the most legitimately studied natural antimicrobial substances in existence. Usnea contains a compound called usnic acid, and this is not a fringe claim. Usnic acid has documented antibacterial activity confirmed in decades of laboratory research, including specific activity against several strains of bacteria that are resistant to some conventional antibiotics. It works, according to the research, primarily by interfering with the way bacteria produce energy at a cellular level, a fundamentally different mechanism than most pharmaceutical antibiotics use, which is part of why resistant strains still show sensitivity to it. Historical use of usnea for infection spans indigenous cultures across North America, traditional Chinese medicine, and European folk medicine independently, all converging on the same general application: wound care and respiratory infection. Usnea was packed into wounds in the field in a similar role to yarrow and steeped as a strong tea or tincture for chest infections and sore throats. A tincture made from usnea, taken as drops in water, has a long traditional use at the first sign of a respiratory infection, and the same tincture diluted in water has been used as a wound wash. Because usnic acid is fat-soluble rather than water-soluble, alcohol-based tinctures extract it far more effectively than a simple hot water tea, which is why herbalists specifically favor tincture preparation for this particular plant. The next time a tree branch is draped in pale, stringy growth that looks like it doesn't belong there, it's worth a second look. That's a documented natural antibiotic hanging in plain sight, completely free. Number 2, elderflower and elderberry, the shrub with two different infection-fighting parts. Elder is a large shrub or small tree that most people notice twice a year, once in late spring when it's covered in flat clusters of small white flowers, and again in early autumn when those clusters turn into heavy bunches of small dark purple berries. It grows along fence lines, forest edges, and untended lots, and gets treated as an overgrown nuisance shrub by most homeowners who have no idea what's growing in their yard. Both the flowers and the berries have separate, well-documented traditional and modern research profiles, which makes elder unusually versatile among plants on this list. Elderberry has been the subject of multiple modern clinical studies specifically examining its effect on upper respiratory infections, with several trials finding that elderberry extract, taken at the onset of symptoms, was associated with a shorter duration and reduced severity of cold and flu symptoms compared to placebo. The berries are rich in anthocyanins, the deep purple antioxidant pigments, along with vitamin C and flavonoids that laboratory studies have shown have both antimicrobial and immune-supporting properties. Important note, raw elderberries and any part of the raw plant contain compounds that are toxic and must be properly cooked before use. This is not optional, and identification should always be confirmed carefully before harvesting anything from this plant. Elderflower, separately, has a long traditional use as a diaphoretic, meaning it promotes sweating, taken as a hot tea at the first sign of a fever specifically to help the body move through respiratory infections more efficiently, alongside documented mild antimicrobial and anti-inflammatory compounds in the flowers themselves. A syrup made from properly cooked elderberries, taken by the spoonful during cold and flu season, is one of the most widely used and researched home preparations from any plant on this entire list. Elderflower tea, taken hot at the very first scratchy throat or chill, has centuries of traditional use behind exactly that application. A shrub most people mow around without a second thought carries two separate, independently useful parts, both aimed squarely at the same kind of seasonal infection. Number 1, sumac, the battlefield antiseptic hiding in plain sight along every roadside. Not poison sumac, the harmless and extremely common staghorn and smooth sumac that grows in dense colonies along highway medians, field edges, and neglected lots almost everywhere in North America, easily identified by its cone-shaped clusters of fuzzy dark red berries standing upright at the top of the plant in late summer. It's so visually common that most people register it as scenery and nothing more. Sumac has one of the most extensive documented uses as an antiseptic and infection-fighting plant across multiple indigenous nations, and that use extended directly into field medicine used within relatively recent history, not distant myth. The berries and the inner bark both contain extremely high concentrations of tannins, along with malic acid and other organic acids, compounds with well-documented antimicrobial and astringent properties confirmed in modern laboratory analysis. Tannins work by binding to proteins on the surface of bacteria and damaged tissue, which both slows bacterial growth and helps tighten and close minor wounds at the same time. A dual mechanism similar in spirit to yarrow, but through an entirely different chemical pathway. A strong infusion made from crushed sumac berries steeped in cold water, sometimes called sumacade because of its naturally tart, lemonade-like flavor, has a long traditional use both as a beverage and at higher concentration, as a wound wash and gargle for sore throats. The inner bark, scraped and prepared as a poultice or wash, was specifically used on wounds and skin infections across multiple indigenous herbal traditions, valued for both its astringent and antimicrobial action in situations where nothing else was available. That combination, easy identification, extreme abundance, and genuine documented antimicrobial chemistry is exactly why it earns the top spot. It isn't the most exotic plant on this list. It's the plant most likely to be within arm's reach of almost anyone reading this right now. Along a roadside they've driven past 1,000 times without a second glance. If you made it through this entire list, the plants growing along your fence line and your driveway cracks are never going to look the same way again. These weren't random weeds that happened to survive. They were the antiseptics, the wound dressings, and the infection remedies people depended on for thousands of years before a pharmacy existed on every corner. 11 plants, all common, all overlooked, all backed by real documented chemistry. The knowledge didn't disappear because it stopped working. It disappeared because convenience replaced it, and an entire culture started treating every wild plant at the edge of the lawn as an enemy instead of asking what it might actually be useful for. Some of the most genuinely antimicrobial plants on the planet are still growing for free along roadsides, fence lines, and forest edges all around us right now. People spray them, mow them, and rip them out without ever knowing what they had. If you learned something from this video, hit the like button and subscribe for more. And if there's a topic you want covered next, forgotten remedies, battlefield medicine, survival plants, ancient antiseptics, anything at all, drop it in the comments below.